Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Elrond, Master of Healing. This is an Elf Tribal Scry Matters deck, and this deck is a donation from Raccoon Walker, who says, "Hi, you reviewed my Baba Lysaga deck a while ago, and more recently my Tolsimir Blink deck. I think your channel is really cool, so I wanted to support you. Thank you." And they said, while I'm here, I was wondering if you could take a look at my Simic Elf deck. The idea is essentially to build up a board, make a lot of mana, and buff my creatures to win. The win cons are Overwhelming Stampede and or Haldir Lorien Lieutenant. Bramblewood Paragon is a new addition because I struggle to deal damage without trample. The deck was originally a Lord of the Rings deck, and I wanted to stay on theme, so there's a few cards, particularly creatures, that I'm staying away for thematic reasons. Notably, this is supposed to be a good guys deck, so I didn't want any Phyrexians in it and such. I also avoid +1/+1 counter staples that seem too off-theme, like Colonian Hydra or Kodama of the West Tree. Obviously, I've strayed pretty far from Middle-earth, but this is still intended to be an elf deck led by Elrond. And then the word as, which I know is not initials, so I don't know if the message got cut off there, but for everything else in that message, we can definitely do that. I've got maybe a handful of suggestions. I think the deck is already in a really good place, and I'm going to pick out a few things that I find kind of difficult to play with the Lord of the Rings elves, and hopefully without taking the theme away and improving the deck. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. Alright, so who is Elrond, Master of Healing, and why are they our Elf Tribal Scry Matters commander? Well, they're a 4-mana 4/4 Elf Noble in blue and green. And they say whenever you scry, put a +1/+1 counter on each up to X target creatures, where X is the number of cards looked at while scrying this way. And then it says, whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it becomes the target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. So how do we play with Elrond? Well, Elrond has two abilities, and I'm going to be honest, I really do like the second ability way, way more than the primary one there. I think that first one is good, but what it effectively does is it reads as, so every time you scry, with X being the amount you scry, you put X +1/+1 counters on it. So a lot of, a scry 5 represent 5 +1/+1 counters. But that's not actually true, right? Because you need 5 creatures in order to do those 5 +1/+1 counters. So generally what we want is a smaller number of scries more often. Because hypothetically, let's say Elrond is he's our only creature, a scry 2 is kind of wasted. We want that scry 1 twice, because then we can put 2 +1/+1 counters on Elrond. And with that in mind, I think that first bit is good to put a few +1/+1 counters here and there, but it's really that second bit that we care about, where it says whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counters gets targeted by your opponents, you draw a card. This is really good because Elves tends to have a lot of really key, strong pieces, and being able to get cards from them, presumably when your opponent is going to remove them, but they could be like phasing them out or other things, that is going to make a very big difference and get you a lot of card advantage when you are presumably falling behind by removal. Now, this doesn't do anything to board clears, which are like Elves' other enemy, but it is a start, and I think it's a very unique place to be. Also, blue-green is not a color combination we tend to see for Elves prior to Lord of the Rings, so this is a really cool combination. So let's take a look at the deck itself. Looking at the deck list, I really do like it. There's not too many things that I think I don't love, but as a whole, I think it's pretty strong. Nice land count, lots of creatures, and we can see the curve is pretty nice. Now, there are still a few things I want to pick on, and let's start with the way I want to go at I often want to go at by. First, we're going to look at a lot of the high mana stuff, and then we're going to look at what's in the 4-mana slot, because that kind of coincides with our commander, though I when we get there, I'll argue why I don't think that's such a big deal. And then finally, we'll look at a few cards here and there and look at scrying a little bit. So I think our most expensive card is Dismiss into Dream, which basically turns all of our opponents into the old style of illusions where they can be shattered by targeting. Now this is an interesting card, and I do like it here as a finisher, because what it does is every time we scry, Elrond's ability will then allow us to like shatter an opponent's creature, right? Because we target it with the +1/+1 counter, Dismiss into Dream sees that and shatters the creature, forcing it to be sacrificed. That's really, really good, especially in an aggro deck, to have this kind of finisher. Now, I recognize there's other finishers in the deck and other ways the deck wants to finish games, but this is technically the most straightforward. Like this is the biggest one. This is like the biggest finisher that doesn't just win the game off of one opponent like Overwhelming Stampede. Instead, Dismiss into Dream aims to end the game with overwhelming advantage, and I really do like that here. I think this is something that, you know, blue-green elves could really use as a form of interaction and a form of a win condition. So I really do like that inclusion here. Looking at our other options. So let's go to Realm Seekers. Realm Seekers is a 6-mana elf scout that comes in with an enormous amount of +1/+1 counters. And then for 2 and a green, you can remove a +1/+1 counter from Realm Seekers, search your library for a land, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So this card I don't love, and I don't love it for a number of reasons. The first thing is, it is a 6-mana card that doesn't win you the game, right? In a deck that, yes, in Elves, making mana is not a very difficult thing, but it's still a nominal thing to cast a 6-mana card. And when we compare it to every other card, even besides Dismiss into Dream, we're looking at Overwhelming Stampede, Kindred Discovery, these really, really good cards that we have access to. Realm Seeker just doesn't carry that kind of power. It's just they're just a very, very strong group of elves, right? Then following up, the second ability is somewhat not as strong here, because what the main strength of that second ability is that we can use it to grab a very specific land. It doesn't say basic land on it. So we can grab something that just allows like a combo piece that's a land, or a very, very powerful, I think of the lands that make unblockability and stuff like that. Like those kind of things could be really good, but we're not playing those. So that's not really going to happen. And that's not even counting, of course, the idea of the fact that you have to pay additional mana to do this. So either you need to have 9 mana to play this card and immediately use the ability, which is a lot, or you have to play this at 6 mana, wait a turn cycle, come back to you, remove one of its +1/+1 counters, get Rogue's Passage, play it, tap 5 additional lands, including the Rogue's Passage, give this unblockable, attack, and take out a player. And take out a player is not guaranteed even. Like, I don't love it. I think it's too much work. I also think it's easy to imagine this being very big, because 7 times 4 is 28. Here we are on Cursed Deck Builder doing math. And I just don't think that's realistic, because depending on your pod, people might have 4 cards each, including you, and that's a 16/16 for 6. Yeah, that sounds good, but without anything to help it hit and it just being kind of a big beater, it's really not that great. So with that in mind, I'm not too impressed. Especially because 16, even 28 is not enough to actually take out an opponent in one attack most of the time. So I don't particularly like it. I think it's an easy cut. Looking at another one, Rishkar's Expertise. This is a card I talk about a lot that I don't personally like. Here, I don't mind it as much because we're going to have more mana ramp because we're in Elves, but also because we have a much higher chance of having a bunch of big creatures, and we have a lot of different draw cards here to kind of get us through it. But even then, I'm going to say not enough. I still don't particularly like this. I think you'd be a lot happier if you wanted a conditional draw card. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Oh, spell creature correctly. Green 5. And that is Shamanic Revelation. I think you'd be a lot happier here because I think generally this will draw you more in the mid game. So I said this, I think it was my, not my last video, but the video before, is that Rishkar's Expertise is the kind of card that really teeters on win more. Because for this to be worthwhile, you want at least one really, really big creature. And Shamanic Revelation is similar, but it goes wide. So you might be thinking, okay, I get that there's a bit of a mana difference here, and Ferocious is like a bit of a bonus, and this one doesn't cast a spell, but why Shamanic Revelation? Like, aren't they very, very comparable? And what I'm going to compare is this. You need to find which one of these two is more accessible for your deck. What is more likely for your deck? To have one very, very tall creature, or to have a lot of small creatures, right? And I think 9 times out of 10, Shamanic Revelation is usually easier to access than Rishkar's Expertise. Like, that's not always true. Like, I think there are certainly some decks that can make a really big dumb beater very, very quickly. And this is going to be, especially if that beater can then tap for mana, I think this is going to be the better one. But for a lot of decks, and yours especially, you have an easier time making like 6 creatures than making a 6/6, I would argue. And with that in mind, I think Shamanic Revelation is better. And one more thing I'll say about this, because I hear your voice in my head, viewer, as I often do, saying, but Cursed Deck Builder, isn't it really easy for this deck to summon Elrond and then put 2+1/+1 counters on him, and now you have 6 power, so therefore Rishkar's Expertise is the superior one? So this is why I said easiest way to do this, right? That would be win more. Remember, our definition of win more is a card that is at its best or only good when you are ahead and you have your commander out. And if you have your commander out and you're putting +1/+1 counters on him, opposed to like growing the rest of your army, you're probably in the lead. If you're putting +1/+1 counters so that you can get the most out of Rishkar's Expertise, you have obviously no other threats to deal with. You are winning the game instead of like being a little more, playing a little safer, right? So with that in mind, I think this would fall into win more, and I like Shamanic Revelations more. All right. Moving on. Overwhelming Stampede's great. Let's go into the 4-drops, because that is the next step. Now, I do like that our 4-drops aren't very, very, like, there aren't a ton of them, but I do want to still go through them anyways, because they are at the same amount that our commander is. So, Fathom Mage. So Fathom Mage is a difficult one. I think I'm going to suggest a different draw card when it comes to my additions. So I feel a lot more comfortable just saying I don't think this should be in the deck. And here's my reasoning. My reasoning is that both modes of this are kind of difficult to do in the deck. In order to put +1/+1 counters, easily, I will argue, we use our commander, right? Now, that's not always the case. We have Arwen, we have Pollen Bright, Druid-style cards. We have a lot of different ways to put +1/+1 counters, but I think it's safe to say that the easiest way is our commander. And I want to check Gyre Sage for a second. So this is +1/+1 counter as well. Interesting. So Fathom Mage is also not an elf. That's another thing I don't like. So we have 2 things that we have to work with. We have to work with it's not an elf, that our main way to put +1/+1 counters is with our commander. She's also the mana cost of our commander, and she is a 1/1. With Evolve. So as we know, Evolve really works when we put greater creatures on the battlefield. But you can see a lot of our creatures don't get much bigger than a 3 power. And even then, the majority of our creatures are 1 or 2 in their number slots, right? Like Thassa's a 5/5, but Thassa doesn't come into play as a creature most of the time, so we can't even use her there. And whereas like Wood Elves, Rex Sage, let's see, Gyre Sage, Paradise Druid, Incubation Druid, Arwen coming in after this creature, which would be a mistake, but it does happen, or Elvish Archdruid. We have a very big kind of limit, I will say, on the Evolve mechanic. And I don't think that's the worst thing. Like, we do have other things like the proliferate off of the evolution stage, which is really strong here. But like overall, this is a lot of work to draw a card every now and then, right? Like, Fathom Mage is really, really good when we have like Master Biomancer out, we have Arwen out, and then we slam this card, and she comes in with what, 3+1/+1 counters minimum and draws us 3 cards, right? And that's really, really cool. Which is funny because if Arwen and Master Biomancer are both out, it would be more than that by definition, but we won't go into that. Regardless, that is when Fathom Mage is really, really good. But when Fathom Mage is bad, she's just really bad. And for a 4-drop at this level being bad like that, it really doesn't catch my eye. I think a much more dedicated +1/+1 counter deck with different synergies is where I would imagine Fathom Mage to be. So with that in mind, I think she's an easy cut here. Especially as I've said before, I'm going to have a stronger 4-mana draw card. Frilled Mystic, likewise, is just a little too much work for counter magic. And in fact, there is another counter magic card that I'm going to poke at as well. And the main idea here is that I don't think you need to have this much counter magic, especially not Frilled Mystic, which represents a very, very high amount of mana you need to hold up in a very specific mana color combination. And so with that in mind, I think Frilled Mystic just doesn't do enough for its mana cost. And even then, you could do a lot better. If you really want this ability, you're just going to play Counterspell. Like, just play the classics. Don't worry too much about it being not being an elf. Just play the superior card, because a lot of the times, like Frilled Mystic belongs in a flash deck, not a elf deck. So I would say this is an easy cut as well. All right, Galadriel. Okay, this is one of those I gotta read. Another elf. Each player votes for Dominion or Guidance. If Dominion gets more votes, the ring tempts you, then you put a +1/+1 counter on your ring bearer. If Guidance gets more votes or the vote is tied, draw a card. Okay, let's reread this. At the beginning of combat, if another elf entered the battlefield this turn, you either get a ring tempt and a +1/+1 counter on your ring bearer, or you draw a card. I don't like this. This is a lot of work for a really, really small benefit. If this was like every combat, I think that would be neat, but probably too strong. She is a 4/5. I will say, out of this set, the Galadriels that came out, I was just not impressed by them. I really like Galadriel as a character, and I really like this art is so good. I really like her depiction here as Galadriel. But I just don't like her cards. I just don't find them to be very, very strong. So I think this is a really easy cut. She's strong. Don't get me like a 4/5 is really good for an elf, but other than that, she just does a kind of complicated thing that doesn't really give you a huge benefit. I found all the voting mechanics out of this commander deck to be just really complicated to give you really not much. So I think she's an easy cut. She is Lord of the Rings, I get that, but I think this is a card that's just holding your deck back a little bit. Master Biomancer is great, absolutely no problem there. All right, 4C. Scry 4 is a very interesting number, and this is a really strong card. It's traditionally thought of that a Scry 2 is akin to drawing a card. And you might say, well, then is a Scry 4 akin to drawing 2 cards? Not exactly, but it's close. I would consider this to be drawing 3.5 cards in terms of card advantage, though one might argue it might be even more, because digging that far makes a very big difference, especially because you can see a maximum of 6 cards, so that is a very deep dig. I do like 4C, I love the pun, and I do also think it's pretty strong in this deck, so I think I'll keep that over the other options here. Ooh. Tamiyo's Epiphany is a copy. Okay. All right, let's start by just saying Inscription of Insight. I don't really like this. We can cut this really, really easily. It's just too clunky, and I think the kicker cost is too much to get all of the modes, and 4 mana to draw 2, to scry 2, then draw 2. Even on theme, I just don't want that. I think I would cut that. Let's come back to 4C and Tamiyo's Epiphany when we look at Wave Goodbye. Return each creature without a... Yeah, this is great. Perfect. This is fantastic. Okay, so Tamiyo's Epiphany and 4C. Do I want one, do I want both, or do I want none? So this is a card that's mainly good with your commander out, but it's also really, really good in neutral. It's just a lot of mana. So I think I would keep both for now. I'm going to be adding some mana to your deck when we get to additions, so this should be a little more feasible. But I would play both and then see if it's too much, because I think these cards are close. They're really, really strong cards in a deck that cares about scrying, and the fact that you can just kind of use them as intended as a neutral draw, it is really attractive to me. They are a lot of mana, and they have no green pips, so you can't use something like Gyre Sage to pay for it completely, which is a bit of a bust, but other than that, I am really interested in them. Decks that can play cards like this do really well. I'm just gonna, brief aside, I always suggest low mana cards. A lot of Magic players do, right? And I think there's this idea behind it that maybe newer players tend to think that there's like an elitist side. I've heard this before. There's like an elitist side to it that you just don't want to cast big spells ever and you just want to stay to the ground. And I'm going to tell you right now, big spells are good. 4C is a good spell if you can cheat the cost. At 4 mana, it's just too much mana. So if you have a deck that easily reaches 4 mana constantly, 4C is much better than a lot of different draw options. Like Harmonize is 4 mana in green to draw 3. And I think 4C is better if you can take advantage of its mana cost and its scry ability. So I like these cards. I don't mind that there's so much mana. I just think you have to be able to take advantage of that mana that's available. All right, let's see a few other cards that catch my eye. And I've said this before, Calculated Dismissal feels a little strange here. It's a 3 mana counterspell. I get that it's here for that Scry 2 effect, but 3 mana counterspell is way, way too much, especially when it's not an actual counterspell. It is a, they have to not have 3 mana. It's Mana Leak, but worse. And if you want that first half, play Mana Leak, but like I said before, counterspell. Oh, you are playing counterspell. I missed that, sorry. Okay, so don't play either, Frilled Mystic or, where are you? Or Calculated Dismissal. You're playing counterspell. If you want another counterspell, you should be playing something like Swan Song. You could play Dispel. Things like that is where I would start, because you want specific counter magic to stop board clears and other interaction from hitting you. And with that in mind, you don't want things that are only sometimes effective. Let's see. Okay, we have creature ramp that we'll come back to. Land ramp that we'll come back to. I'm just checking if there's any creatures here. Incubation Druid. Oh no, that's still not the one. Where are you? No, I just said that one. Pollen Bright Druid. My brain was remembering that it ended in Druid and started with P, and it couldn't quite remember get back to it. So Pollen Bright Druid, I think, is really close to being not good here, right? We have a lot of ways to put +1/+1 counters, but I don't think they're enough. And Pollen Bright Druid just kind of does too little. If we had meaningful blink, maybe I would like this more. But if we compare Pollen Bright Druid to something like Evolution Sage, it's not surprising who wins out incredibly quickly, right? So Pollen Bright Druid just feels like it wants to be a different card, and I'm going to suggest a few cards in that place. So with that in mind, I don't think it really belongs here. All right, I think it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is not the beast within. It is Opt, Elven Farsight, Preordain, Serum Visions. And I would say even Omen of the Seas. So let's just start with the one that catches my eye the most. We'll say Opt. That is cute art, I will say. As much as I like their love, I will say this is on theme, right? All of these cards are on theme because they scry. But is that enough? And I'm going to say for the majority of them, that answer is probably no. So Opt is definitely not good enough, because if this card read Scry 1, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, draw a card, just permanently. We're not even going to consider that you need your commander out. I still don't think that's particularly good enough for a deck like this compared to other cards you could play that could accelerate your game plan. This is just kind of cute. You're holding up mana to replace itself, and you're going to then take advantage of getting a single +1/+1 counter. I don't see it. I don't think this is good enough here. It's on theme, but it's not great. Likewise, Serum Visions is kind of tough as well. Now this is Scry 2, so it's better, but it's the reverse preordain. And in Modern, we recently unbanned preordain, and people are remembering how big of a difference it is between preordain and Serum Visions. So if you haven't felt that difference, I'm going to say it is a big difference. And Serum Visions is just not that good of a card. We're going to come back to an element of scrying in a second when we go to land ramp, but here the problem is kind of that you're just replacing itself. You're putting 2 +1/+1 counters. And I don't think I would play 1 mana, put 2 +1/+1 counters onto a creature. Or onto 2 separate creatures. I wouldn't play that. And if you don't have your commander out, you don't even have that. So these, at least Serum Visions and Opt, are not good enough. Now, Preordain is much better. Preordain is good enough that I'm really willing to let this one go because it is a really, really strong spell. Is the synergy really there? I don't really think so. I still don't think it's really, really strong. So I think that's fine. But a lot of the times you could cast this on your first turn or second turn and just be fine with that. I think that's good. But Preordain itself is just a good card, so you can get away with it. So I don't mind that. Elven Farsight, I've talked about this before. I think my favorite thing about this card is this elf is using this scrying pool to see what I assume is Gimli. The Farsight is literally seeing someone she can see from a distance anyways. So this is like the most useless Farsight I've ever seen. Also because elves have incredibly good vision in Lord of the Rings. So like just the worst scrying pool you could ever imagine. Now, if she's been watching him for a while and he's just arrived, maybe, but I refuse to believe it. This is fantastic. It's just a magnifying glass. Okay, so but this card's interesting. This is also one that I'm like, okay, this is probably good enough. Scry 3, and then if it's a creature card on top, draw a card. With 27 creatures, the odds are pretty good. I'm willing to take this. I think this is good enough. It's on flavor. It's fun. That's fine. Omen of the Sea is close. Now we're getting to the point that it's a 2 mana, and Scry 2 draw a card at 2 mana. I don't really like anymore as much. I appreciate that you can sacrifice it later for another Scry 2, but is that really what we want to be spending our mana on? Like, how often, I mean, play this deck and cast Omen of the Seas early. How often do you sacrifice it? I would say rarely, because you should consistently have better things to do with your mana. So in my mind, it's just going to be rare for you to be able to use this second ability. And even then, 5 mana to do all of this, it's just okay. It's just okay. It's not really furthering your game plan. It is putting 4 +1/+1 counters if you have enough creatures. Yeah, I don't like it. I think Omen of the Sea is an easy cut myself. Coming back to Elven Farsight for a second, something I will speak against it is the very fact that you do have to remember that you need 3 creatures out to take advantage of the Scry 3. So there might be situations where you don't have enough creatures. I don't see it happening a lot, but it is at Scry 3, that's a high enough number that there might be situations where you only have the 2 creatures, like if you're rebuilding and you need to keep drawing to rebuild, you might not get the full bonus of it. But even then, I think it's fine. Once again, in my opinion, the +1/+1 counters are just kind of secondary. All right. Let's talk really quickly about one more thing before we go to additions, and it is land ramp. And that's going to kind of change, let me give my addition first before we talk about the land ramp. I would like to change this land ramp into our 1 mana dork elves. So Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, Findhorn Elves. You could play Boreal Druid. Heritage Druid's a little more expensive, but definitely worth playing. And then if you want more, Jaspera Sentinel or Sentinel Stalwart. Those are the ones I would pick. Obviously, Allosaurus Shepherd is here being a very, very good elf, but it's also very expensive, so I don't tend to suggest it. But The rest of these elves, I would say, at least these three, this four, this five. Actually, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. And then if you want others, sorry, I'm realizing my mouse doesn't come up on this. So Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, Finehorn Elves for sure, Heritage Druid for sure after, Boreal Druid if you want another one, Jaspera Sentinel, and Citadel Stalwart if you want an additional one. But let's just talk about the three main ones here. So they're all elves. They're all creatures that tap for 1 green. We're already happy. But what's the main reason I want them to replace our other ramp? And the reason is that simply, okay, there's two aspects to it. The one is the one I always talk about, where land ramp comes in 3 flavors: 1 mana, 2 mana, or 3 mana and above. 3 mana and above is if you want to ramp really hard. 2 mana is pretty standard because it's hard to interact with lands, and 1 mana is on creatures, and it is also, it's easier to interact, but you get a creature. And this deck obviously cares about creatures and is going to be much, much happier with having more creatures on board. So it's easy to just straight up say play the creatures instead. But there's something here to be said about the fact that these cards, these land ramps, Farseek, Nature's Law, Rampant Growth, is that all of these cards, I didn't see Track Down. We're going to come back to that. All of these cards shuffle your deck. And the thing is you have very few deck shuffling, and you have few enough that I'd rather you not play any if you can help it. Why? Well, as players know, Scry does actually do something in the game beyond immediate satisfaction, right? When you scry enough times, you reduce the chances, well, in normal 60 card formats, you reduce the chances of drawing certain cards. In this format, you completely remove the chance of drawing a card. If you scry 1 and you put, let's just use Nature's Lore to the bottom of your deck, and you don't have shuffle effects, which is funny because Nature's Lore is your only shuffle effect. If you don't have any other shuffle effects, you put this card on the bottom of your deck, you will never see this card again, right? There should, never say never, but there should be almost no chances outside of your opponents shuffling your deck to see this. So the idea is that every subsequent scry in between shuffles, every time we use a preordain effect to scry, every subsequent one gets a little better because we're seeing more and more of our deck and we're getting more and more cards to the bottom that we know are on the bottom and we will never draw. We are stacking our deck very, very slowly. So in a deck that already runs very few shuffle effects, I would like to take the rest of them out. And I would like to just capitalize on this ability, on this Scry 2 ability, to take advantage of the fact that we can know our deck, right? So that's the other bonus I want to say about playing these elves, other than the fact that they're very good. Speaking of mana, the next thing I'd like to add is Priest of Titania. Priest of Titania is just a classic elf ramp card. I think you have a few 2 mana ramp cards. I think you could very easily replace Paradise Druid with this if you'd like, but Gyre Sage, Incubation Druid, these cards are fine, but they require work to be dramatically good. Whereas Priest of Titania comes down and just does work. She easily taps for 2 or 3 the first time usually, and then after that, it's just, she gets out of hand incredibly good. And that Rebecca Gay art is so, so good. So I would absolutely say Priest of Titania goes in here for sure. Now, let's talk about card draw. I said I would suggest a card draw card, and that is Beast Whisperer. And Beast Whisperer, I think, is just better than Fathom Mage because this is just on cast. You'll draw a card, so you have complete control over that. He's an elf. Once again, this is on tribe, which I like a little more. And I think he's just strong enough, you know. As you get more mana, as you get more cards, especially if we add these 1 mana elves, you're going to be able to draw quite a few cards off of this guy, and you're going to be pretty, pretty happy. All right, let's go into Evasion. Something you mentioned that caught my eye was that you added, where are we? You added Bramblewood Paragon. Is this Spanish? I think so. I could be wrong. I know Portuguese is close, but I don't know if they make Portuguese cards. So this card says each other warrior creature you control comes in with +1/+1 counter, and each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter has trample. And you said this made a big difference. And I'm gonna be honest, I do agree. This is a very, very important difference for your creatures. Let's go a little further in this direction. We have two really good choices outside of just doing more trample effects to kind of help out. Now, the first one, both of them aren't elves, which is worth noting. But as I've said a bunch of times, in tribal decks, we got to not worry too much about that, right? It's not that important to be 100% on tribe. If you are willing to play Thassa, God of the Sea, who is not an elf, if you're willing to play non-elf spells, you should be willing to play non-elf creatures here and there. But you already played Fathom, so I know it's not a problem, but I'm just saying that because I've been saying tribal a lot. Let's say Kindred. Our Kindred decks require, a little bit of non-on-theme support. So Champion of the Lambholt, really, really easily, whatever is smaller than the champion cannot block your creatures. And very quickly, this creature is going to get big. Now, notably, she doesn't have Evolve, and I think that's a big, big difference, is that without Evolve, she gets so much better because it's just any creature, because you can put in a lot of small creatures very, very quickly, and therefore get Champion of Lambholt to, if you can get her to like a 5/5 really, really quickly, you're going to be in a really good position to get very good attacks in. And I would argue if you have Biomancer or Arwen out at any point, and you play this, and Champion of Lambholt comes in with like, let's say 3 +1/+1 counters, or easily becomes a 4/4, you're in a really, really good position because immediately you have a really good attack on your side that you can go in and take out or do severe damage or take out an opponent. So Champion of the Lambholt is also exceedingly cheap for what she does. So I do really, really like that. The other one I like to say is Herald of Secret Streams. And this just got reprinted, so it's under $2, so I would definitely pick this up. And this one's a lot simpler. At 4 mana, it says creatures you control with +1/+1 counters can't be blocked. End of story. And I think this is the best version. It's a little more expensive in mana, but doesn't rely on your commander as much. And there's going to be a lot of situations where you just have enough +1/+1 counters through Biomancer or Arwen, and you'll just slam Herald of Secret Streams, and all of a sudden you'll get a very clean attack on maybe all of your opponents. So I think this is the best unblockability, evasion setup that we can get. Just the can't be blocked is more than enough here. All right, and I have 2 more suggestions that are a little more suspect. So the first one is the Palantir. Now, this is an object of evil, but can be used for good. You were saying that you wanted your deck to be about the good guys. Okay. This might be pushing it. It is Lord of the Rings themed, and it's just an object. Objects aren't evil, right? Except for in the Lord of the Rings world, where they definitely are. So I'm still going to suggest this. I would understand if you didn't want to do it. It's also kind of pricey at being like $12 to $15 American, which is a bit much for me, but for this ability, but it's worth considering. So end step, you get a Scry 2. That's honestly the thing that really, really caught me really, really quickly, because just triggerable scries that happen regularly and quickly are where you want to be. So I already like this being just an easy scry 2. But after that, we have all of this text that basically says, in a lot of different words, that eventually your opponents are going to have you start drawing cards so they don't lose tremendous amounts of life. It won't happen at first, but basically you're going to target your opponent with the least amount of life, the one you've been... So you play Palantir, and then you attack one opponent. And turn after turn, you're going to attack them until you get them to a lowish life, let's say in the 20s at least, like below half health, and then you start targeting them with this ability and you stop attacking them, because you want them to feel threatened by the ability and draw you cards. So I do like this. I like this as a turn 2 play, especially with our 1 mana elves, but I think it's going to be rather good. I'll leave this up to you because I do think I'm kind of cheating a bit when I'm suggesting it, but it is an interesting card. One more card that may be a little less on theme, definitely not an elf, but is really interesting and strong in this deck, is Scurry Oak. It's a tree folk. You can pretend it's an elk. It's an ent, sorry. It works. So Scurry Oak is an evolved creature that's a 1/2 for 3 mana, but that's not what we're reading it for. We're saying whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on Scurry Oak, you may create a +1/+1 creature, squirrel creature token. Why is this here? Very simply, because we have Sylvan Anthem. So this says whenever green creatures enter the battlefield, you scry 1. Under your control, I should say. So you play Sylvan Anthem, you play Scurry Oak with your commander out, you scry 1, which means you put a +1/+1 counter on Scurry Oak, which creates a squirrel, which allows you to scry 1, you put a +1/+1 counter on Scurry Oak, so on and so forth. So with those 3 cards, you have infinite amounts of squirrels and an infinitely large Scurry Oak. That already I'm a big fan of. But if you have anything like Master Biomancer, anything like Arwen, those squirrels themselves will also be very, very large. I guess that doesn't matter. Infinite is infinite. I guess it's just infinite then. I'm trying to think of any other benefit you can get out of this with the infinite ETBs. And I don't really think there is. I guess what it also does is it makes a card like Champion of Lambholt infinitely large. That's pretty good. But most likely if you have that combination and your opponents can't board clear, you've won the game. So I like that personally. I also don't think it's too bad just with your commander in general, because as I've mentioned before, this whole ability is that when we scry 1, it's just putting 1 +1/+1 counter. It's not that impactful. It's good with that second ability here, but if they're not targeting your things, it's just a +1/+1 counter. So Scurry Oak lets you get a little further with that, but what I really do like is it actually improves your Scry 2s a lot more, because then you can, because one of the things you want to do is put that first +1/+1 counter on every creature, but after that, you kind of pick a creature, right? Like, think about it in the sense like this. You have, let's say you have Land of War Elves and your commander out. So when you scry 2, that first counter on Land of War Elves is really nice, and then you grow your commander. But if you keep scrying 2, it just doesn't matter as much as this goes on. Like, Land of War Elves takes a really long time to become a decently sized creature, and even then, you can do better things with it. So after that first one, if you like having a Scurry Oak around, so whenever you have extra +1/+1 counters to spread around, you put it on the Scurry Oak so you can get another creature out of it, is a lot better. So I do personally really, really like this. I think it's strong. Once again, the evolved text can basically be ignored. It might get you 1 or 2 squirrels when it first comes out, but that's very, very unlikely. I think you're just going to be very happy with just generating squirrels and being very, very good with like cards like Arwen, cards with, well, I mean, everything's good with Arwen, so take that as you may. Arwen's $10 now. I should pick some of her up when I have a chance. She is very, very impressive. Okay. And I think that's it. That's all I'm going to say for now. We've gone for almost 45 minutes. I do like the deck. I think my... I didn't talk about Track Down. Scry 3, reveal the top card of your library as a creature or land card, draw card. So 1 additional mana to maybe hit lands. Sure, I think it's fine. It's not the greatest, but digging 3 is meaningful, and being able to at least get a land if you miss is fine. If you can't, it really sucks. I think I would cut it, because like I would play probably, if you were going to cut Serum Visions or this card, I would probably play Serum Visions over this. But to be fair, this also costs only green, so you can use your elves to tap for it completely. Okay, play this instead. Yeah, this is fine. Okay. With that, I'm going to say that's going to be all my suggestions for the deck. This is a great deck. Thank you so much. for sending it. Raccoon of the Court. Is that the name you used last time? I want to make sure I got the right one. Where is it? Raccoon Walker is what you told me last time, and it's Raccoon of the Court. So I'm going to say Raccoon Walker again. Thank you so much, Raccoon Walker, and thank you for supporting the channel. I think this deck is great. I love the decks you send me, honestly. I think they're all really fun to build and play around. And this might be a bit more of a standard kind of deck with a kindred theme to it, but it is a fun deck, and I think you'll have a good time with it. I think my suggestions are pretty straightforward, and I think you will do well with them. But if you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you would like to support the channel to bring your deck to the front of the queue, there is a link for that as well. As always, like, comment, subscribe, do that whole YouTube thing. And yeah, thank you so much for the deck, and good luck improving it.